I'm Karen Tweet, president of the local League of Women Voters of Thurston County, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this forum this evening. The title is Where's the Water To? What are the realities of water quality and water quantity in Thurston County? What I've seen so far promises to be a very interesting and informative meeting. This forum is part of a multi-year study of water being completed by the local league with the seemingly tireless leadership of Paula Holroyd and her team. This forum builds on and updates forums held in 2019 and is the second of two public forums that we're holding this year. This is the final public forum in the study process. The next step will be the water study team beginning the process of writing up the results. A little bit about the League. We were established 100 years ago along with the women's right to vote in this country. We are nonpartisan in that we never support candidates for office or political parties. But we are political in that we encourage the informed and active participation of citizens in government, and we influence public policy through our studies of issues like the water study and education and advocacy. Despite our name, our membership is open to all persons over the age of 16. Later, there'll be a little bit of information about how you can become a member of the League. It's my pleasure this evening to introduce our moderator, Karen Fraser. Karen is a lifelong Washingtonian who has served Thurston County and Washington State for many decades, breaking many glass ceilings along the way, including being the first woman mayor of Lacey, the first woman president of the Washington State Association of Counties, and the first chair of the Nisqually River Council. She was Thurston County Commissioner for 8 years, moving to the Washington State House of Representatives in 1988, where she served 2 terms. She then joined the state Senate, serving for more than 2 decades as part of the powerful Ways and Means Committee. We are grateful for Karen's public service, her long involvement with the League, and her willingness to moderate this forum tonight. Thank you, Karen.
Well, good evening, everyone. First, thank you for the nice introduction, Karen. 2 Karens here. And I really enjoy being a member of the Thurston County League of Women Voters. And this is a great study that the League is engaged in. It's a pleasure to join each of you this evening. Thank you for your active interest in water resources here in Thurston County. And just one more shout out for the chair of our water team, Paula Holroyd, and she's our superstar of our committee, but it's a very active committee of about 10 people. So, and again, this is the last forum for this water series. So before I introduce our excellent speaker set, I'd just like to kind of to get our heads into this, do a quick reminder of some of the things we've learned from our other forums real quick. First, fresh water is fundamental to our lives, which is why we must pay attention to it. Humans cannot live without water. Our bodies are about 60 or 70% water. Our food supply depends on water. Our economy depends on water. And some water facts: there's no new water in the world since the world was created. Nearly 97% of the Earth's water is salt. And so that means only around 3% is fresh water, and about 2/3 of that is not available for human use because it's in glaciers and ice fields and clouds, or way too deep in the earth or too remote from where people live. So we just figure about 1% of the water on the earth is fresh water available for human use. So this is a precious resource. In Thurston County, a couple of major facts. The population is growing rapidly. This is in both the urban area and the rural areas, but the amount of water is not changing. In fact, there's a risk that it might be reduced. So we might end up, as we grow, with a situation where we have less water per person available to use. And there is a growing water shortage in Thurston County. The first basin was closed in 1950, and now all basins are closed to new water right permits in the entire county. And it's had implications for groundwater, for water levels in the groundwater, for fish in the streams, and more. So it's important to plan, and our water planning in the area focuses on watersheds. The principal ones are the Nisqually watershed, the Deschutes watershed, the Chehalis watershed, and the Kennedy Creek watershed. And we've heard a lot about various issues as we've had these forums. The lowering of groundwater levels, problems with stream flow, and water pollution, both surface and groundwater pollution, the need for conservation, and the need overall to how are we going to move into the future with population growth, but not water growth? So there's a lot for all of us to think about. And I'm just so pleased to introduce our speakers tonight. Maybe our three speakers, could you turn your videos on? Well, I'll just quickly introduce you, and then I'll introduce you separately as you each take your turn. But we're we're going to hear from excellent presenters tonight. Kevin Hansen, I don't know could you raise your hand so people know who you are? So yeah, he is the hydrogeologist at Thurston County. And that shows you how important water resources are to our county government, that they've hired a hydrogeologist. Second, Art Starry. Art, could you wave? Art is the Director of Environmental Health for the Thurston County Department of Public Health and Social Services. And Art has had a full career working on water resources in Thurston County and environmental health issues. And then next, Julie Rector, who is the Water Resources Specialist with the City of Lacey. So welcome to each of you. And so the process here tonight is we'll ask each of our presenters to make their presentation, and then we will have Q&A after that. So we're asking you to use the question and answer icon at the bottom of your screen to pose your question. And we have a little committee that's going to look through the questions and try to be sure we don't duplicate questions, and we coordinate them and so forth. And so then Carol Goss from the League will be asking the questions that have been compiled from the Q&A box. So with that, why don't we begin with Kevin Hansen, and the other three of us will turn our screens off. Kevin, it's all yours. And a reminder, Kevin is Thurston County hydrogeologist. Welcome, Kevin.
Karen, thank you very much, and thanks for having Art and myself on today. I am really glad to see the issue of water brought to the front. I think it's a huge one. Obviously, this is what I do every day, so I think that, but it is a critical one. I'm going to switch now. I'm going to do a screen share to a PowerPoint show. Let's see how this goes. All right. Let's go now to PowerPoint show. Now, Karen, are you able to see a PowerPoint show on your screen?
Yes, it looks great. I see bubbles.
You see bubbles? I apologize for the all caps font. I realized after the fact, but okay, here we go. So it's an update on water availability and water quality issues in Thurston County. So the framing that I want to bring out is the same one that Karen just mentioned, population. Now, this is the forecast done by the Thurston Regional Planning Council, and look at the numbers. You know, we're at the last update, we were at 267,000. We're expected to be at 393,000 people by the year 2040. Now, that is really remarkable growth. It's a testament to how great our area is and how much people want to live here. It's a terrific area. So But bear in mind, where's their water going to come from? Because as Karen mentioned, water rights are becoming very difficult to come by. So the second part of that is, where's their wastewater going to go? It's not something we talk about much, but it's an issue which is crucial to good long-term planning. And it's right at the heart of the Growth Management Act because of the costs involved in supplying both water and wastewater service in rural and urban areas. So let's go down to the next slide here. Now, look at this. Now, I'm just going to leave it on this slide for a second. This is a snapshot of groundwater pumping. And this is in the southwestern part of the county. These are rural lots. And this was a plate we developed for a particular project, but I've shown it before and I think it really makes the case. So you have to imagine to yourself, if somebody new wants to move into this area, this is near Rochester, where are we going to put their well? Because every single purple dot is someone's well. The big dots are public supply wells, and the small dots are domestic wells, small wells put in by an individual homeowner. So, you know, the rule of thumb is that no one can impair the water rights or the water availability of someone else. But if there are already this many wells in the ground, what's a person going to do? Now let's go to the next slide and think about that. Almost all of it in the future, as it is now, is going to be groundwater. Thurston County is overwhelmingly supplied by groundwater. Now we're lucky. We've got a lot of groundwater. It's doing very well. It's largely pretty good. And the breakout you see here is just for the pumped part of it. So the blue bar on the far left is 837 public supply wells, referred to as Group A system wells. They're regulated by the State Department of Health. Then look at this middle bar, fish propagation wells, only 24 of them, but boy, do they pump a lot of water, 572 irrigation wells. And then look at this brownish orange bar closer to the right end of this plot. We nicknamed this the cigarette plot. That brown bar is 19,332 existing domestic wells. Wow, that's a lot. Now, if you keep going over, there are other uses. Now, at the very, very far right, you see the number I've inserted with that box below to the lower right of the screen, 100 to 500 new wells per year that are affected by 90.94 RCW. That's a new law, and I'll show you why it's a new law. In 1910, the photograph you see here was taken, and the folks standing here are the graduating class, the first graduating class, as I understand it, of Rochester High School. It is remarkable. I mean, not only is it fully integrated men and women, but they're standing in a largely dry creek bed. There's only a little bit of water, and that's really important. 110 years ago, we had water stresses on our county to the point where something had to be done. There simply wasn't enough water that everyone could divert as much as they wanted for every purpose. So then came about this concept we now consider to be legal water. Now, legal water is crucial for us. The oldest water rights, and the concept of legal water is sort of parsed out on a permit by permit basis by the Department of Ecology. The Department of Ecology, not Thurston County, just the Department of Ecology has the right to issue water rights. The oldest rights are from time immemorial. They predate all others, and they're tribal, usual and custom rights. Actually, usual and custom includes more than just water, but I'll leave it at that for now. Then by 1917, problems like we saw in the prior old image, surface water permits and water rights were enshrined in code, and they became eventually Chapter 90 of Revised Code of Washington, RCW. By 1945, people began to realize that the same water that they were pumping, that they were diverting from a stream, was actually in the ground. In other words, groundwater and surface water were the same thing. So we had to issue groundwater permits. But, and here's the crucial thing to note. I don't know if you can see my cursor. Some wells were exempt from groundwater permits. Crucial distinction. And then by the 1970s, streams began to get rights in the sense of there were minimum in-stream flows below which we couldn't pump a stream or divert a stream. So if you look at the history of how the water rights pressure began, as Karen mentioned, I was really, Karen, thrilled to hear you say that. In 1950, they closed the first basin, Scatter Creek Basin, in southern Thurston County, Southwest County. By 1960, there were restrictions on all of these basins. It was not entirely closed, but it became much, much more difficult to get legal water. The water rights people had were basically all they're going to get at this point. Now, by 1976, look at all of the closed basins or restricted basins. And by 1988, essentially, the entire county did have restrictions on new water rights. This is a, dare I say, watershed moment in the history of the county, because it meant that the permits for water withdrawal that we have were all given out, essentially. So you ask yourself, wait a minute, growth didn't stop in 1988. What happened? Well, how did people get water when there weren't any more water right permits? Here we go, and this is the latest count. They started drilling private wells. 22,130 at current count, permit exempt wells. About 94% of all wells in Thurston County, largely in the rural areas, not entirely, but largely in the rural areas, as of this month. And that's after 4 years of compiling the data. So this is a data set we feel pretty good about. The number is just astounding, but this is the only way to get water. So in 2016, the cumulative effect of the wells you just saw became apparent to the Washington State Supreme Court. And 4 years ago, almost now, they passed the Hearst decision. Now, the Hearst decision said each new water right, each new water user, each consumptive user of water, no matter how small, could not impair the rights of anyone else. Well, what do you do? Okay, so the individual homeowner wants to continue to drill a well. What's the option here? So remember that Hearst is primarily a growth management requirement, and Thurston County is a growth management entity, GMA entity. So it says we're not allowed to issue building permits and growth permits if there's not available water. Now, a lot of people initially got this confused because they all thought that the county was issuing water rights. Well, we don't, we can't. Under Washington law, Department of Ecology is the only entity that can issue water right permits. So here's the question, and I love this shot because it shows this time of year and a salmon in a stream getting ready to spawn. Can we replace the water we take out? Because that's what the new law said. We have to replace the water that we take out. They called it the Stream Flow Restoration Act. It was passed, signed by the governor in 2018. Thurston County, right now, as I speak, is tracking 146 potential water offset projects countywide. We're taking this very seriously. We have to offset the water from every new permit exempt well. But this is a key point. The new law was not designed to repair past stream flow deficits. All of those brown closed areas that I showed you a moment ago, they're not covered by this new law. It's just the forward-going mitigation that we're dealing with at this point. So I want to show two slides that I show a lot. This refers to the groundwater as a bank, the groundwater bank, and it shows precipitation, the big yellow arrow coming in, and diversions and pumping coming out of it. And then the next slide shows water coming out. Now, what's the difference? This is summertime. Most of the water leaves the system in the summer. It comes in the winter and leaves in the summer. So although we have lots and lots of water and people think of us as a wet climate, we are not that wet in the summer. And it's easy to forget that a few weeks ago, the fire companies were very nervous. It was a very dry time of year. And we need to be able to get that water to last us all year, even across the dry periods. So we're developing plans, and the plans cover the RIAs, as they're called, Water Resource Inventory Areas, that define the statutory areas within which we have to develop plans. We've already got one plan developed in the Nisqually Basin. We've got 3 more plans in process in the Deschutes River Basin, Upper Chehalis, and the Kennedy-Goldsboro Basin, which overlaps dominantly onto Mason County. We're in wonderful, wonderful collaborative committees working with a host of partners. Many of them see each other over and over again, but it's really a great collaborative effort working to mitigate for the effects of permit exempt wells. So the status of those, the commissioners strongly support it. We got the Nisqually watershed done. They've got the thumbs up on the Chehalis plan for ecology review. Next are the Deschutes and Kennedy-Goldsboro plans, which should be completed in the next few months. It's a collaborative process. Despite diverse interests, everyone is helping to produce the result. It's really, really cool. But remember, it's dealing with the fairly small slice of the water pie. That's something we perhaps need to come back to. So let me give an example. Can we actually repair a stream? This is Spurgeon Creek. It's, geographically near the center of the county. Almost all of my creeks are too dry, except for Spurgeon Creek. It is really interesting. Why is Spurgeon Creek doing so well? Well, okay, here it is. Now, Spurgeon Creek is a lovely little creek. We have a gauge on it. We measure the flow. That means we measure the flow and level and stage. We measure the water temperature and a host of parameters. We sample from this creek and many other creeks. So we've got these things dialed in as far as data collection. But the funny part here is that the flow in Spurgeon Creek, this is discharge in cubic feet per second. The flow in Spurgeon Creek, dare I say, it's too high. It's marvelously high. Even the low summer periods are at about 6.5 CFS. That's cubic feet per second again. Now, the plan passed back in the 70s, I believe, that restricted water use on Spurgeon Creek said that only 0.5 CFS was the minimum. So we're way above that. Now, why is Spurgeon Creek doing so well when everybody else in the county seems to be too dry? And by everybody else, I mean the little streams. Well, okay, we looked hard at that. This is the list of candidates. We think they may all contribute to some extent. Spurgeon Creek has beaver. Now, everybody has very, very strong emotions about beavers. So I will say that when they're there, the ponds store a ton of water. The wetlands store water. Lower density development helps reduce consumption. We have a higher proportion of older forests because part of the basin overlaps onto JBLM. That's Joint Base Lewis McChord, the military base. It actually has a significant area in Thurston County, and part of it overlaps on this little basin. And we have the emergence of modern stormwater management in the 1990s, which tended to keep more water on an individual person's property instead of letting it run off. And that was partly flood control, but it served a lot of positive purposes. Now, so I had that success story. Now I've got a harder subject. This is turning now from the positives of maybe we can restore some streams to the much more difficult question of septic systems. Now, there are many ways to look at this. What I'll start with is to say that Thurston County regulates them. We have a very strong emphasis on septic systems in rural Thurston County. We have at least 51,000 of them, and I'll show you a map in a minute, and that number is growing. The Sewerage General Plan from 1990 talks a lot about the separation between sewer and septic. And it asks us to go back and look at the information later and say, well, how is it working? So we did that, and we had a couple of actual zoning changes that were strongly influenced by septic system densities. Now let's take another look at septic systems and see, can we crack a really difficult nut? What do 51,000 septic systems look like on a map? Well, this is a lot like it. Now look at all those dots. These purple-brown dots you see are clustered around developments. They're clustered around the towns, the unincorporated areas. Some of them are in the incorporated areas, many of them the historical legacies, and they really dominate our land use. You can tell where people live when you look at this. So if you compare where sewer systems are in the northern part of the county, this is approximate as of a few years ago. It's not quite up to date, but it's pretty close. The municipalities have been building sewers like crazy to source their new development. Now, what I just did was I laid down all those purple dots on top of the septic systems. So, on top of the sewer lines. So look at the purple dots. Now, these are septic systems and sewer together. some cases, they're quite close to each other. What I want to talk about is an example area called Tanglewild and Thompson Place, which are two closely spaced developments up here built in the 60s and 70s. Let's look at what their impact is. Oh, sorry, I'm zooming out again. In order to look at septics, it's valuable to come up with some way of comparing how dense they are. So what we did was we've got a big model over the whole county, and we aggregated the septic loading of wastewater by model cell, and then added rainfall, recharge, to dilute that. And then we came up with what is effectively the amount of wastewater being added to the aquifer, the top of the aquifer, by septic systems in each model cell. So this is all just septic, doesn't include land use and a bunch of other factors, but it lets us narrow down on this specific questions that might be asked about septic. And this refers to something called the assimilative capacity of the earth. And it asks the question, are we close to the limits of earth systems to treat wastewater? Now, the way this is color coded, anything which is red is at a concentration of, now I'm going to get technical, but you need to know this, 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate. So nitrate is one of the substances commonly present in septic wastewater. There are a lot of other things in there too, but nitrate is one that's easy to track and cheap to analyze for, so it's a good tracer, if you will. Anywhere it's red, it is above 10 milligrams per liter, and that's the federal maximum contaminant level defined under the Safe Drinking Water Act. Now, what does the orange mean? The orange means that it's greater than Thurston County's contaminant action level, or CAL. Now that starts at 4 milligrams per liter and goes up to 10. Anything which is yellowish is between 2 and 4 milligrams per liter, and anything which is green is less than that. So you notice this is there's a lot of bright color on this map. So let's look at a particular area and find out if we can begin to ask the question, are we loading the earth maybe right at the edge? Well, let's see. We have a lot of groundwater samples, and now what I've done is zoom in on the Tri-Lakes area. So the big lakes you see near the center left part of the screen, Pattison Lake, Long Lake, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Hicks Lake, Pattison Lake, and Long Lake. The brown smudges you see are densely clustered septic systems. Now, we have a lot of water samples in here that we got from many, many sources. But the problem with water samples is that they're one-time snapshots that don't tell you where it came from. How do you know what affected that water sample at that exact moment? It is so devilishly difficult to know that we had to use better tools, because we don't want to impugn any particular cause, and it's very difficult to develop policy based on water samples that are collected at infrequent intervals for reasons and maybe affected by things that we can't yet know. But you will notice that the purples and oranges, which you see quite a few of, those are, again, we're trying to keep the color coding the same here. Those are, purple is above federal MCL. Wouldn't want to drink that water. Orange is above Thurston County's contaminant action level, at which the county can take action. In many cases, you'll see we sample to find out, is it going to get worse, where there's an orange dot. So now I've zoomed in, and now I'm showing you that model in which we've calculated the loading, the mass loading for nitrate at model cells in the Tanglewild and Thompson Place neighborhoods. So let's now see what this means for us. Wastewater from septic spreads naturally in groundwater. So when you put a drop of this stuff into the earth, it doesn't stay there. It moves. So that's a question, because it might move beyond the parcel boundaries, beyond the property line of the person that put it on the earth. Well, that could be troubling. Now, one thing I have to say, the earth is really good at absorbing wastewater. Typical fecal matter in urine. Wow, the earth is fantastic at that. That's why septics are such a popular choice, because the earth does a pretty good job. But it doesn't say much about where there might be more than the Earth can sustain, and it doesn't say anything yet about where it could move. Those are really, really important questions. So now I'm going to show you a movie. I hope you can see this. I'm going to pop this up. Karen, if you're on, can you see this animation snapshot here?
I see a snapshot.
Okay, good. Is there a big clock in the upper right-hand corner?
There is.
Okay, now let's try playing this. What I'm about to do is take, you see the little gridded squares that appear all around? Those are septic systems in the model at about the year 1970. Now let's see if we run that 28 years forward, what it looks like. Karen, can you see that yellow spreading?
Not yet, no. And the clock is not moving either.
Okay, hang on for a second. Let me pause that. I think I need to switch screens. So I am going to go over here and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and share something different. Okay. Okay. Now, Karen, can you see this video if I turn this on?
Yes, it is moving.
Okay, good.
Growing. Yes.
Growing, good. So the edge of the growing yellow-green area is at about 1 milligram per liter. That's about the limit of our ability to detect nitrate in groundwater. The 5 contour, they see the number 5, that's kind of flicking around a little bit, but you can see the number 5 attempting to follow a bold line. It's going to replay now. It's going to replay. That 5 triggers state restrictions, or it could trigger state restrictions, while the 10 contour, the 10 line that circles a lot of these little gridded specks that are septic systems, that's the federal MCL, at which we're really concerned about nitrate. So this talks about how things can actually spread beyond the property line, and that is a pretty important question. So now let's go on. I had a couple of snapshots there in case the video didn't work. Let's go on down now. So this is about the year 2000, quite extensive spread of nitrate in groundwater off the property lines of the original septics and toward this center blue line, which is Woodland Creek. And I should have said that this curved band up here is, of course, Interstate 5. So if septics are so difficult, how can we make progress? Now, Art, I'm going to turn it over to Art Starry because this is really an impressive show, and I want you to see what happened here, because we're going to give 2 examples of where things improved and why they improved.
So thank you, Kevin, and thanks everybody for watching tonight. And again, I'm Art Starry. I'm the Environmental Health Division Director for Thurston County Public Health and Social Services. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Henderson Inlet and some improvements that have been taken place there, and why that I think has happened. And then kind of also talk a bit about some challenges that we've had to face recently. And again, I think it will show that even when you do good, that you have to kind of keep working at it, or else things can recede and you need to continue to be diligent about things. And so for a number of years, actually, this is going to date myself back. If you go back to about 1983, when I got hired, one of the reasons I got hired was to work on Henderson Inlet because there were shellfish downgrades going on there. And that's been an issue for a long time. And so Thurston County, Henderson Inlet is one of the many, or the 3 inlets we have that do a lot of, where there's a lot of commercial shellfish harvesting. And so this is, again, a story of what's happened there. Kevin, can you give us the next slide? And this is a slide that Kevin prepared, and what it does is it shows the different, so Henderson Inlet is the water body that you're seeing there in the middle, and the different colored dots represent the volume of water coming in and pollutant sources. And can you explain it a little bit more, Kevin?
Sure, Art. This is the bacterial concentrations measured in samples of the main stem of Woodland Creek and the tributaries leading into it, dating from 1983 and thereafter. So this is the older data. when we saw really high concentrations of bacteria from a number of different causes. And all right, I'll hand it back to you.
So we had a number of issues. And so what happened, which was kind of the most recent monumental thing, was in the year 2001, there was a shellfish downgrade in Henderson Inlet. There was also a downgrade in Nisqually Reach, which is the area off to the right. You can see Nisqually Reach on the map there. And what that required then was for the county to start to look at how they could make improvements to water quality to help restore the shellfish harvesting area. There were some recent changes in state law. It required the county to develop a shellfish response strategy. It also required us to identify pollution sources and to bring together the different partners who might be able to affect some sort of changes that resulted or that would result in improved water quality. And so there's a number of efforts that took place. The county worked then to convene a group that was involved with the representatives from the city, representatives from the shellfish industry, citizens who were concerned about stuff. We had advisory committees for both Henderson and Nisqually, and together they put together a shellfish plan that they continue to monitor to this day. There's a group that continues to pay attention to this stuff to see if we're making progress or not. And as a result of that, there were a bunch of actions that took place across the county, everything from the city of Lacey. It's nice that Julie's here because the city has spent a tremendous amount of time and effort working on stormwater and also helping work on some sewer utility extensions into areas. The conservation district working on landowner and agricultural practices. The cities, again, City of Olympia is also part of this basin. Individual homeowners, what they can do as far as landscaping practices and taking care of pets. And then, the part that I had an involvement with is largely dealing with on-site sewage systems or septic systems, and the county was able to develop a strategy to work on that. And Kevin, next slide, what happened? You're silenced, Kevin.
Yeah, sorry, I had a couple of questions. People were seeing a black screen, so I'm trying to make sure that they can see the PowerPoint show. Okay, can someone give me a thumbs up that we're showing the PowerPoint show again?
Yes, here it is. Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, next slide.
Okay, so what happened was that from 2001, when those downgrades took place, until 2017, all that kind of collective impact of those collective efforts resulted in significant improvements in water quality. And I should say that when we talk about water quality in shellfish, we're talking about fecal coliform bacteria. So Kevin showed that scary plot earlier, that model output that talks about nitrogen. And so nitrogen doesn't really, shellfish harvesting and nitrogen, they're kind of two different worlds on that. So what we're talking about here is fecal coliform bacteria. But from 2001, the map on the left, you can see that the green area, and the State Department of Health uses kind of the universal mapping method of saying green is good and red is not so good. You can see that the green area grew, and in 2005, the red area stayed about actually grew a little bit more, but the yellow areas, improved some. And then in 2017, there was a significant, and there's actually another iteration in here that I didn't put in, but in 2017, you can see that the shellfish harvesting area had increased substantially. There's about 366 acres, if I remember right, that moved from being conditionally approved or being prohibited to being approved. So that's a very significant change. And at the time, it was really well celebrated. There's a little study coming up next that I'll tell you about. And just for folks who are looking at that red area up in the Woodard Bay area, that reflects actually that it's closed for conservation purposes. So it's not a reflection of the water quality. It's just that it's closed for other purposes. So if you're looking up there and saying, well, why is that so bad? It's closed for another purpose. So Kevin, next one, please. And what happened is, if you look at the bottom line there, it says there's a story map at Henderson Inlet Effectiveness Monitoring. There was a study that was done by the State Department of Ecology to look more closely at what happened. So this was again a pretty big deal, an urbanized watershed where shellfish harvesting acreages had improved significantly. And so they had one of their teams of folks doing an effectiveness monitoring report and study on Woodland Creek and the water quality in Henderson Inlet. And what the chart on the left shows is the improvements in water quality over the years. And you can see that in 1996, that dashed line, Woodard Creek fecal coliform concentration started to go down. And then they actually looked at nitrogen too. In 2001, you can see that that was kind of the at the pinnacle or the point of inflection when water quality started to improve with nitrogen. And there's a whole bunch of activities that resulted in that. And I mentioned them briefly before. And what's even more surprising, and it's, I guess, not surprising given the slides you've seen earlier, is that the population is growing at the same time. And so during that time frame, it looks like the population went from about 47,000 to 62,000. So quite an increase in the number of people who've come into the area. We've got more activities going on, and yet somehow water quality within the watershed improved. And if you do have a moment and you can go look at that Henderson Inlet Effectiveness Monitoring page, and you go and look at something called a story map there, it tells a really good story. I felt like actually cheating at one point and just saying, I'm going to give my 15 minutes away to that story map, and then so I wouldn't have to speak so much, but I chose instead to do this. But it's a really good thing. Next one, Kevin. And this map on the left is actually, both of these figures are from that report that the State Department of Ecology did. And they are able to show, again, that all these different activities that have been taking place there over the years resulted in significant improvements in water quality despite the increases in population. And the map on the left, I won't spend a ton of time on it, but it shows the types of different activities and projects that took place within the watershed. Everything from stormwater improvements to things to do improvements on riparian areas. We had a big sewer conversion project within the area, land acquisition, improvements to agriculture. And you can see that the map, then the underlying colors, there's a different color coding there that reflect the improvements in water quality. And in this map in particular shows fecal coliform bacteria. And it shows that green zone is where there were significant improvements, and the other areas where it wasn't quite as significant, but still improvements nonetheless. And when you think about, again, that green area is probably where the most population growth is taking place. That's, I think, pretty significant. And the chart on the right shows, again, the types of projects that took place and how those seem to, the time and the time that they took place and what was happening to improvements in water quality at the same time, going back from stormwater improvements in 1993 to improvements to fish passage to the 2001, I know, a really big stormwater improvement with the city of Lacey, different land acquisitions, sewer conversions, other different activities that took place. And I feel disappointed that they don't have a big sign up here that says septic system and monitoring and maintenance programs, but I didn't get to talk to the author about that. So, but that was going on in the meantime, is that Thurston County, the health department, had a program that requires some 7,000 septic systems out there that undergo regular monitoring and maintenance to identify whether systems are failing and to correct them if they are. Because past studies have shown that on-site sewage systems, when they fail, they can have make a significant contribution to the degradation, or I won't say, anyways, they can really mess up water quality. How about that? So next one, Kevin.
Sure. Hey, Art, I pulled up the Henderson Inlet Effectiveness Monitoring page. Would you like to show that to folks?
You can show it really quick, but I know we're running probably a little bit long, but.
Okay, I'll just show you the page. There it is. And if you go through these tabs, really it shows impaired waters, projects and monitoring, funding, water quality trends, results, I'm sorry, and long-term water quality trends. Okay, Art, I'm going to put it back.
Yeah. And the project, again, showed that there were statistically significant improvements in water quality, and it also, I again tracked that to the types of activities that took place. And part of that was to show the folks who are responsible for providing funding for activities that their investment was paying off. But even though things were going really well, this next slide shows that they can change. And so more recently, and this map shows from 2016 to 2019, that there are kind of those dark zones And the little red dots up above it, and Kevin can explain more detail, shows that we started to see water quality problems associated with Dobbs Creek and Fleming Creek, which are two tributaries to Henderson Inlet. And did you have anything you want to say about that, Kevin?
No, it's perfect.
Okay. So the next slide shows that, okay, it really did have an impact on shellfish harvesting, which again is one of the big indicators we have for water quality improvement. And that is that now that blue zone is now conditionally, there's restrictions on it. So what happens is when there's certain types of rainfall events, shellfish harvesting, it can take place, but what happens is the shellfish need to be collected in one area, then relayed to another area where water quality is better, and then they can be sold for harvest. And you can see that the map's changed and that now the Woodard Bay area is now gray. You know, there was concerns about that being red earlier, so we addressed that. So this has led to the need to try to do other types of activities to figure out what's going on there. And so in the past few years, the health department has been able to receive some funding and been able to start to look more closely at the pollution sources that are affecting the stream. So we've worked with the State Department of Health and with property owners to see if we can try to decipher what's happening and to work to seek improvements. And so next one, Kevin. And so there's some preliminary water quality results for Dobbs and Fleming Creek. And like before, the red dots indicate areas where fecal coliform concentrations are elevated. The size of the dot has to do with the number of fecal coliforms, and the blue dots show that we're in those areas, water quality meets the standards for surface waters for the types of streams that those are. So that's some preliminary results. And you can see that Dobbs Creek area seems to have the greatest problems, and we're looking at that, and there are in this case it looks like it's largely septic system driven. There's an area with a high concentration of septic systems, and maybe some of them aren't being maintained as well as they should be, so we're in the midst of doing that investigation. We also have been able to get some resources to actually be able to help folks repair septic systems and look to develop a plan or a strategy for how to manage that area, because it is way out in the rural area. It's not something where sewers or something like that is going to be able to rescue the situation. Those folks are going to need to come up with the means on their own property to be able to deal with that. So next one, Kevin. And here's some sample results that show from about a year and a half ago that show where we were starting to see elevated water quality or fecal coliform levels in Fleming Creek. In this case, it's, which one are we using? E. coli results. So we're well above the standard of 300 and something. I should have remembered that. We should have put that slide in, Kevin, or did we take it out? And the next one is Dobbs Creek, which again, we'll just kind of keep it simple and just say the red means bad, or 406, excuse me, that should be the number. And so we're exceeding that at a lot of these tributaries within the area. So that's what we're continuing to do now, is because this is having a significant impairment on water quality. So the good news is that if everybody works together and people are able to find the resources, we could have big improvements in water quality. But again, if just because you fixed it once, it's like your car. It doesn't mean because that repaired it that repair is going to last forever. You need to continue to maintain the thing, or else you might have problems. And we're starting to see that again in these two tributaries. Oh, there we go. So the EPA surface water quality standard and the pollution identification standard again for the red zone is 406. And some of you might have recalled some different numbers from the past. What's happened is that the EPA and Department of Ecology have changed the measure that we use. So we're not using fecal coliform now, we're shifted to E. coli. So it's a little bit different numbers than maybe ones you've seen before. But we won't spend too much time on that. Next one. So that was Henderson Inlet, another area, and this is a part of the spot that Kevin showed earlier with all those pink dots or purple dots that showed all the wells, is the Scatter Creek area. And I think this is another example of how when you're able to pull together folks and with different interests and engage the community, you can come up with some good solutions and good answers. And that I probably, again, could, if people have more questions about it, I can go into it. But the Henderson stuff that was really intriguing to me from years ago was that the staff who were working on it were really diligent, but when we engaged the community and brought in folks with different interests and different ideas, the end results and the products that we came up with and the solutions and the alternatives improved a lot. And people came up with stuff that none of us would have thought of. And yet some of them, when we were able to find the resources to enact them, turned out to be really significant as far as engaging the community and building community support and ultimately leading to the successes that we've seen. So I think that's a big thing in Henderson, and it showed up again here in the Scatter Creek area. So the Scatter Creek area is it's the area between Tenino off to the right-hand side there of the kind of within that green zone off to the right. You can't really see it is Tenino and then the Rochester Grand Mound area. And so here's a LiDAR map which shows the general topography of it, that shows the community. You can see I-5 and the kind of running along the railroad tracks going north to south. And then you can also see Old 99 going off to the east there. And this is a map that shows a groundwater monitoring well network that the county had developed. Most of the wells are private wells. And years ago, we were concerned because there were times when the water quality, and sometimes fecal coliform bacteria would show up, but often what would happen is that nitrogen levels would exceed the federal drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter. And I think that shows up here on the next slide, or one of the next slides. Well, first I want to talk about how the area is also developed. So in the mean, we're seeing water quality changes, but you can also see how the area has changed over time. It was largely agriculture. Some of those, and also some of the fish farm wells or the fisheries withdrawals that Kevin highlighted in the one map, or the cigarette map, are in the Grand Mound Rochester area. And that's because the aquifer is fairly shallow. It's very productive. It's, as far as irrigation water or being able to use processing water, it's a great source. It's high quality water quality overall. But as you can see from these charts, the maps in the upper left-hand corner looks pretty rural, mostly farm area. This is, again, pictures of the same thing. And over time, you go to the upper right map, you can see that now development's starting to come in. There's more homes. The farms are being converted to residential. The lower left, it's expanding even more. And on the lower right, you can see that both the number of homes and then the number of parcels. So what's happened is a lot of property has been subdivided. In particular, these areas, you can see that racetrack sort of thing. There's a bunch of new homes in there, and then also along Old 99. So next one, Kevin. And here's the map that I knew was coming. I got them out of order in my head. This was in pre-2010. And so using the same kind of methods that, or the same key that Kevin had described earlier, you can see that there's a fair number of those kind of orange dots that show that water quality for nitrogen is above the critical action level of 4 milligrams per liter. And there's some wells that are pink, which is above 10 milligrams per liter. Is that right, Kevin?
That's right.
Excuse me here. So that's why we wanted to be engage the community to talk about, well, is there an area of concern here? Is this something that we should be trying to develop strategies for? And so the county was able to get resources to work with the community to be able to basically buy some time from our county hydrogeologist who we had at the time to work on this issue. So next one, Kevin. And the initial concerns, as I mentioned before, are that we were starting to see, or actually there was a history of water quality, nitrogen violations, sometimes exceeding the federal drinking water standard, but a whole lot of times when the contaminant action level of 4 milligrams per liter was exceeded. Then again, if you look in in terms of that, that's kind of like the yellow light. You know, when you see you're coming up on an intersection, it means, oh, something's here. We need to start planning to figure out what to do. Or in this case, when you have that exceedance, and I think there's the presentation that's coming up later on, Julie might talk about this, but it shows that we need to start taking some action, because we don't want to get to 10 milligrams per liter, because that's putting the public at risk. And there's lots of information that suggests that maybe even 10 milligrams per liter is, there are health consequences below that, but we certainly don't want to have to treat water or tell people that they need to find other sources. So next, Kevin. So what happened was we were able to obtain funding to work with community members to develop a strategy for the Scatter Creek Aquifer and to be able to do the modeling that I mentioned earlier. So the project looked at the impacts of septic systems on the aquifer, and it provided an opportunity to look at other things. And so this committee, this is sometimes what happens when you're trying to find grant funding, is we ended up focusing at first on septic systems, but the committee was had concerns about other things, and they were very smart, very engaged, and they realized, well, you know, there's other things than septic systems that can contaminate the aquifer and cause nitrogen levels to climb. So we want to look at those too. So that was one of the things we were able to broaden our project into. We had 12 members from a variety of backgrounds. They ended up being appointed by our county board of health. It was everything from, you know, developers to folks who had agricultural interests, community activists, and other folks as well. And it turned out to be a really good group. They had over 24 meetings over 2 years. This was probably the most dedicated group I can recall for a project like this. We ended up having presentations by experts and community leaders talking about water quality issues, talking about history. Had 3 public meetings. We did surveys, we did polling, we sent out education and outreach. And at the end of all this, even though when folks came in and there wasn't a lot of agreement coming in, other than everybody agreed that protecting water quality was important. At the end, they created a set of recommendations, and there was unanimous agreement. And I was very pleasantly surprised that came about at the end. So I think, again, speaks to the power of, if you have good information, you have people who are willing to put forth their best efforts and be diligent, you can come up with some really, really good results. So next one, Kevin. So part 1 of the project is, again, we recognize that the aquifer was very vulnerable. I was remiss in not indicating geologically, in addition to being very productive aquifer, this is a very vulnerable aquifer. It's glacial outwash soils, basically sand and gravel from the surface of the ground down to bedrock. It's kind of like, it's been likened to being a bathtub full of sand and gravel, and the drain in this case is kind of going off to the lower left where the water comes. And it's the sole source of water for more than 1,000 public water systems in individual homes. About 18,000 people rely on this. So it's not the most dense area, but these folks, they don't have the luxury of, well, if their water supply gets contaminated and we exceed the drinking water standards, then we have a significant problem. Kevin? And what was impressive is to see is over time, water quality was improving. One thing that did surprise us, you can look at the trends here, the 4 milligrams per liter and the 2 milligram per liter early warning level. You can see that water quality was gradually improving over time. The different dates there, the different years show the range of nitrogen within the range of nitrogen concentrations within the different within the sampling network. And you can see that in 2013, though, there was one sample that peaked up to 6.3 milligrams per liter. And that came about surprisingly when we were doing our sampling. We sampled twice a year, and it just happened to be that there was really, really heavy rainfall a few weeks before we took that sample, and we ended up getting elevated nitrogen levels in one well, and it was the well that had the red star on it that was in the previous chart. And so that ended up being a level up or something of concern to the community members, and something they recommended that we look at further as we continue to try to develop strategies and efforts to protect the resource. Kevin? One of the things we were able to do, as I mentioned before, is having our hydrogeologist who was there at the time, Nadine Romero, and she was able to work to develop groundwater models to show how land use would affect water quality. And this is the result of one of them. One of the things we were able to do is, start with, a model that showed no development and then current state, and then add different inputs to see how that might affect water quality over time. And so this is one result that they spent quite a bit of time in analyzing, which is looking at all current and legal lots, plus taking into account what would happen or was likely to be happening because of people managing their properties with fertilizers and things. And then also that the city of Tenino has a wastewater treatment plant, which discharges off to the far right-hand side of that map there. And so they were looking at that very carefully, and you can see that when you have full build out and lawn fertilizer and everything else, there might be times when we're going to exceed that 4 milligrams per liter. We're getting into the bright orange zone in a couple of spots on the chart or the map. Kevin? What's going on now is that we're able to do more monitoring. We've started, or the Community Planning and Economic Development Department, which is where Kevin works, was able to have funding to be able to develop some monitoring wells in the area. We prefer to use these over single family homes, both because we have complete access to them. We know about how they're drilled, how deep they are, how they've been finished. And then plus we don't have to inconvenience property owners to go onto the property. And it also helps protect them in case something goes wrong with one of these sampling sites. So there's a lot of reasons why we prefer to do this. And so that's where we're trying to go. A new development is that they're putting in some monitoring, I forget the official term is, but being able to put in real-time monitoring devices on these to track nitrogen concentrations over time. So that'll be really good information to have. And that's on 3 of them. So the current information that we've got for Scatter Creek is that the modeling actually matched up well with the sampling results. The conditions are pretty stable. They've gone down some, but they're not declining any further. And as we see more development taking place, as agricultural activities are being converted to septic systems, we might start to see things decline. I should note though that we talk about dairies, is a lot of some of the earlier issues associated with water quality out there seem to be a result of agricultural activities. So this is one of those situations where if you take, depending on how things are managed, you shouldn't make assumptions that septic systems are all bad or that other activities are all good. You have to actually look at how the property is being managed and how diligent people are being. And so what it looks like based on the modeling results is that we're pretty much near the limit of what we can do as far as having on-site systems with the technology that we have. There are improvements in on-site systems. They're not universally being used and not in that area. They cost more. So that's something to look to in the future when we're talking about nitrogen anyways. Kevin? And here's a more recent map that shows the water quality within the Scatter Creek area. And we don't have a side-by-side here, but you can see that there's fewer of those orange dots and only one of the purple dots. So that's a sign of success as far as how the different strategies that have been put in place have helped improve water quality. And while the work of that committee is one of the things that's took place, there's actually a history of activities and policies that have been put in place, whether it's zoning or policies as far as looking at how you evaluate impacts of new development on the aquifer that have had a positive effect as far as allowing development to occur, but also helping protect water resources. Kevin? Again, we had this advisory committee that helped us immensely. Again, a very diverse group. They reviewed and looked at all the county policies and investigations. There's studies going back to the 70s, and we spent time going through them at some level, every one of them. And the committee, oops, you bounced me around, Kevin. But again, there was very positive in that at the end of it all, they created a set of recommendations that was submitted to the County Board of Health that the board accepted with a resolution in 2014. And the committee, again, they created a bunch of, I should say, findings and recommendations that were universally accepted at the end. And so I won't read all these here, but they were being cautious. They were pleased that the current trends were not such that they felt like immediate action was necessary, but that they wanted to continue monitoring. They wanted to have efforts to continue to update and improve our computer monitoring and further evaluate the resources, because as careful as you might be, you never know quite what the future holds. In particular, they wanted to look at that spikes. So that's that one sample that showed 6.3 milligrams per liter. Was that a one-time thing? If we were able to sample over time, that maybe water quality was worse than that for that one event. We really don't know. They don't know. That's something we want to understand further. And again, I mentioned some of these things before, that in general, our policies have been effective, they found, but they also want to help us, or they also want us to strengthen things as we can over time, considering things like how we can best place on-site sewage systems and wells to minimize the potential for one to contaminate the other, and continue education and outreach efforts. So that's been the good news. The bad news is that we've struggled being able to do all this stuff because we don't have really all the resources that we would like. They've also would like us to continue monitoring, and so we've been able to do that with the help of our staff and with Kevin and the folks at CPED to continue to look at bacteria and nitrates, but there's some other things that we'd like us to look at in the future. There's a lot of work that's being done that talks about other contaminants that might be in wastewater, and we'd like to understand that as far as the water quality that's there, and whether that might pose a public health concern. And again, I've kind of said some of these before, but that again, identified that the aquifer is vulnerable, but it looks like things seem to be trending pretty well as far as the water quality is concerned. And again, the modeling has provided some relief, because it looks like under current conditions and with the worst case scenario, it looks like we're probably going to be in good shape. But we still want to continue to monitor this to make sure that we're protecting the water resource, because again, we've got 18,000 people relying on that now. More people are coming into the area. We want to be careful and want to again try to make sure that our water resources are protected. And that's all that I have to say. Again, it's a really rewarding process, and I think again speaks to how things can, if folks are willing to kind of roll up their shirt sleeves and work with each other, you can come up with some really good things.
Yeah, Art, thank you. That's really impressive stuff. Karen, how are we doing on time?
Well, I think we need to keep moving along, and I want to say thank you to each of you for your excellent presentations and presenting, some of the big problems we have, but also that we're doing much better on monitoring and learning what the data is and being able to tailor policy much better. So thank you for being here. So now I'd like to introduce Julie Rector, who is with the City of Lacey. She is Lacey's Water Resources Specialist, and welcome, Julie.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. So I'm going to share my screen now. And hopefully you can see that.
Yes, looks great.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'm Julie Rector. I'm the Water Quality Analyst with the City of Lacey Public Works Department, Water Resources Division. And I've been doing this for a little over 20 years now. So I mainly work with monitoring programs to ensure that the drinking water standards are met in the water system. And I also work on wellhead protection programs to ensure that groundwater that provides our drinking water supply is protected. So I think this will complement the previous two talks pretty well. What I want to talk about is groundwater protection, some of the challenges that we face from multiple potential sources of contamination to groundwater, and some of the planning and regulatory tools that we utilize to protect groundwater. And I'll be talking from the perspective of the Lacey water system, but a lot of these regulatory and planning tools are also used by other water systems. So to go to my example here, here's the City of Lacey water system. You can see in blue is the city limits for the City of Lacey, and in yellow is the Lacey urban growth area. And those red dots in there are City of Lacey drinking water supply wells. So you can see most of our water supplies are within the city of Lacey, but we also have some wells that are in the UGA, and within the UGA, land use is under the jurisdiction of Thurston County. And so it's not within Lacey's control. And the Lacey water system supplies most of Lacey and the Lacey UGA. So the water system supplies about 72,000 people, but there are a lot more people than that in this area. And so I want to illustrate that with this figure that shows wellhead protection areas for Group A and Group B water systems in that same area. So clearly there's more than just the 20 Lacey water supplies. So the Group A systems are these green and red ones. They're water systems that supply 15 or more water connections. The size of these wellhead protection areas is based on both the hydrogeology, the aquifer characteristics, and also the size of the pumps that are pumping water. So these really large ones with the really big areas here, these are very large water supplies. These little purple ones here, these are the Group B systems. They serve like 3 to 14 connections. And when you look at all these wellhead protection areas, which I'll talk about wellhead protection areas a little bit later, what I want to just emphasize here is that a lot of this area is groundwater protection areas. And so groundwater protection is really a regional issue. As Kevin noted, pretty much all of Thurston County's drinking water supplies comes from groundwater, and it's just so important to be able to protect it. So a lot of the information that we have about groundwater quality in the area is from data that's collected by the public water systems. And I don't expect you to be able to read this whole list, but there's a lot of parameters that Group A water systems have to sample for on a regular basis. And these include the organic chemicals that are regulated to protect public health. There's a lot of emphasis on nitrate from both Kevin and Art, and that's one that I like to watch. It's an indicator of potential water quality issues. These inorganic contaminants, they're not necessarily regulated to protect public health, but from the Lacey water system, we look at iron and manganese a lot because we have some deep water sources, and when there's elevated iron and manganese, it's objectionable to a lot of people. And so we do have a couple sources where we have drinking water treatment systems for removing iron and manganese in order to improve the water quality. There's 49 organic contaminants listed here that includes the volatile organics and a lot of the synthetic organics that include like the pesticides and herbicides. In the volatile groups includes a lot of the petroleum compounds. And I'm pleased to say we've never detected any of these organic contaminants in the Lacey water system. We also have to sample for radionuclides. That's generally not an issue here. And then also there's the unregulated contaminants. And this is from an EPA initiative where every 5 years they come up with a list of contaminants that they want to gather more data to determine whether or not they need to add more contaminants that are regulated for protecting public health. And so they ask water systems throughout the entire nation to collect this data for them. And just in the last couple of years, we've had to monitor for things like the perfluorinated compounds, the PFAS, the PFAS, also known as the flame retardants. These are the ones it's been a lot more in the public eye recently because of detects around like DuPont and some other areas around here. And we've also had to do some sampling for metals to see if we need to like lower the drinking water standard, for example, for manganese. And it also included like cadmium-6, which sort of got in the public eye because of Aaron Brockovich. So when we're looking at how we prevent some of these contaminants from getting into drinking water, I wanted to just talk about some of the potential pathways for how these get into the groundwater. Starting with just recognizing that our biggest concerns are really with the hazardous chemicals that are persistent, that are toxic, they're mobile in groundwater, whereas even just a small quantity getting into the ground can potentially create a very large groundwater contamination plume. So we need to know what these pathways are, and we need to know where they are so that we can better manage them. I just run through some of these real quick. When I'm talking about higher risk land uses, I'm talking about landfills, auto wrecking and salvage yards, land spreading disposal facilities. Those are facilities where they don't have a connection to a sewer, and so they dispose of their waste by spreading them on the ground. And there's not many of those around here anymore, thank goodness, but we're not also seeing like new landfills in the area. So these are really our legacy land uses, and we just need to know where they are in case in the future, if those sites get redeveloped, that we're not disturbing the soils and mobilizing any contaminants that might be in those soils. Hazardous waste generators include sites that generate hazardous waste, and then they're tracked either by the Department of Ecology or Thurston County, depending on the quantities that they generate. And the main thing with those is that they need to store and dispose of their hazardous wastes properly. There's also, I sort of lump in with that group, the quantity generators, the sites that just by virtue of the amount of material that they have on site, that they have reporting requirements with the Department of Ecology. And that would include like the home improvement centers and maybe some of these warehouses where they have pallets of like pesticides or solvents or something like that. And so they're actually something that we track, knowing where they are, just in case we need to know where the potential source of contamination is coming from. Underground storage tanks, fortunately, are not as much of an issue as they used to be. Here's just a little figure of a tank here. But in the past, when we just had single hull tanks, in the ground around here, they had a tendency to corrode. And so then they just leak their contents into the ground. And for the most part, we're talking about fuel storage and also home heating tanks. And the Department of Ecology still tracks where underground storage tanks are. So again, we're tracking these as potential legacy contaminants. But now that we have the requirements for double hulls on underground storage tanks, they're less of a concern for newer tanks than they are for the older ones that were installed. Spills and dumping it's always a problem everywhere. Spills, that's mostly from accidents, and they oftentimes occur along transportation corridors. Dumping, not accidental, usually it's intentional. And that one's really a hard one to get our hands on, because it's not something that you can obviously you can say you're not supposed to dump, but it still happens. It's just good to be aware of potential areas where there may be more dumping. Abandoned wells are really important too, because oftentimes there's old wells on a property that might have been the original source of water supply. And if they're not properly capped or sealed, they can be a direct conduit into the groundwater. So it's a direct, basically a straw from the surface into the groundwater. And it's really important that if they're not being used, they need to be properly decommissioned. They can also be a serious safety hazard. It was like probably about 15 years ago. There was a property that was being redeveloped along Pacific Avenue, and there was a piece of plywood on the ground, and someone lifted it up and found a hand-dug well that was probably 3 by 3 and approximately 18 feet deep, and then you could see the groundwater there. So it was not only environmentally dangerous, it's a safety hazard where it absolutely had to go away. It's surprising that there's still some of those out there. Landscaping, we're mainly talking about large-scale areas where there's fertilizers and pesticide and herbicide use. We generally think of golf courses or maybe parks, but we also need to think about potentially landscaping services, and then also maybe residential and home use of chemicals. And septic systems. Art and Kevin did a really nice job talking about septics, but when I'm looking at them, I'm mainly thinking the ones that are improperly used, or they're improperly maintained, or they're just outdated. Like there's some design of septic systems that are just not appropriate for the type of soils that they're in. And I'll be talking about a good example of that a little bit later. And finally, confirmed and suspected contaminated sites. These are also legacy sites. Department of Ecology maintains a list of sites where there's groundwater contamination or soil contamination. And they're on the list because they're either meant to be cleaned up or they've only been partially cleaned up. And it's important for us to know where these are. Again, if there's any redevelopment of the property, we don't want to mobilize any contaminants that might be in the soils. So one of the main tools that we have to ensure that we can protect groundwater are critical areas ordinances. And critical areas, we know they include shorelines and wetlands, but the one for protecting groundwater are the sections that deal with critical aquifer recharge areas. Those critical aquifer recharge areas are the areas, the ground influence, where precipitation primarily seeps into the ground and helps resupply the groundwater. And so we oftentimes look at them as being important as far as groundwater quantity, but it's also really important that these are the areas where our drinking water comes from. And so those areas also need to be protected. At the local level, they may also be called the wellhead protection or groundwater protection ordinances. Lacey's ordinance is actually called wellhead protection and actually, that's not correct. It's called the Wellhead Protection and Critical Aquifer Recharges Area Ordinances. So we cover all of them there. And so the county has critical area ordinances. The cities have basically critical aquifer recharge area ordinances. And one thing that they pretty much all have in common is that they identify areas of high risk based on the type of soils and whether or not there's wellhead protection areas within them, meaning that there's drinking water supplies. They have the ability to restrict certain land uses in high risk areas. A good example of that is prohibiting gas stations within a wellhead protection area, like the 1 year time of travel. I'll be talking about that a little bit later. And they can also authorize for new developments to prepare hydrogeologic reports to basically demonstrate that they're not going to cause groundwater contamination. Or we can also authorize additional protections for new development, such as requiring additional monitoring or additional stormwater treatment. These ordinances, oftentimes what they really do is it's our means for implementing state regulations, and they're really absolutely critical for protecting local groundwater. So talk about wellhead protection planning. So all Group A water systems have to prepare a wellhead protection plan. And one of the most important elements of that is delineating what we call the wellhead protection areas. And wellhead protection areas, it's an estimate of the distance that water moves horizontally through an aquifer to a pumping well over a specified time period. So what we're showing here is, so here's, in this one, it's the 6 month time of travel, the 1 year time of travel. The yellow is the 5 year, and the green is the 10 year. And these are, we get these from computer models that we put in all kinds of information on geology, aquifer characteristics, and also the size of the pumping well, like I mentioned earlier. So this really large area here is a 3 well field for the city of Lacey, pumping about 4,800 gallons per minute, highly transmissive soils. It's a very large wellhead protection area. And so these areas are where careful management of land uses can help reduce the risk of contaminating groundwater. So these go hand in hand with our wellhead protection ordinances as far as restricting land use. Another really important element of wellhead protection planning is doing what we call a contaminant source inventory. And so we're looking for those potential sources of contamination within wellhead protection areas. And it's really important to map them. And then the next step is providing notification to those landowners to let them know that they are potential sources of contamination and that they are located within a wellhead protection area. And the real benefit of that is because, for example, here we've got City of Lacey. Lacey has land use jurisdiction over that area, but here we've got very large drinking water wells that are within the urban growth area that's where land use is under the jurisdiction of Thurston County. The benefit of having wellhead protection ordinances or critical aquifer recharge ordinances that are actually fairly similar throughout the region sort of helps promote consistency in protection within the area. But also, because we're providing notifications, this is one thing that the city of Lacey can do to sort of promote wellhead protection in an area where we don't have land use jurisdiction, is by providing those notifications. And finally, one thing we do for wellhead protection is we do plan for emergency response, and that includes like spill response planning. So as part of those notifications, we also provide notifications to the first responders to let them know which areas are really important for drinking water supply, so that if they are responding to, say, an accident where there's a spill of fuel or something like that, they know that this is an area that needs extra protections. And finally, one thing that we do, it's not required for wellhead protection planning per se, but many of us do also have wellhead protection monitoring programs. And so, for example, I have some monitoring wells that are located at the edge of the 1 year time of travel. So for example, right along here. And the idea for that is that I want an early warning indicator if there's groundwater contamination. I don't want to wait until the contamination is detected in that water supply well. I want an early warning. So I have wellhead protection monitoring wells for Lacey's most vulnerable wells. And those are generally the ones that are shallower. They may not have as much protections from confining layers, sort of like in between the different aquifers, there's confining layers that help slow down the movement of contaminants. And then also just, and also the main transportation corridors where it's most vulnerable. So other tools we have for protecting groundwater at the local level are development guidelines and public works standards. And these are generally used by local jurisdictions to sort of standardize expectations for development. But I also use these for adding some additional protections for groundwater. And for example, in the city of Lacey, we've put in our development guidelines prohibitions against constructing new permit exempt wells within city limits. Like I mentioned, all wells are potential conduits to for conducting groundwater contaminants to groundwater, unless they're properly sealed and some other, they have to be constructed well. And so, but smaller wells, shallow wells, they're more vulnerable to contamination. It's better that if they are supplied their drinking water supply from the city of Lacey, there really should be no reason to have a new permit exempt well. So we just prohibit them. We also require directing stormwater away from source wells. And then we can also require more stringent stormwater treatment within wellhead protection areas. So the development guidelines are actually really good tools that we use for protecting groundwater. Public education, I can't stress enough how important it is, particularly with regards to source control. And we're very fortunate with the stormwater manual. I think you got a talk here earlier that talked about ecology stormwater manual and all the requirements that are involved with that. Public education is really key. And the same sorts of things that help protect surface water are also very good for protecting groundwater. These include messages about source control, the availability of a spill response hotline. So if someone sees a spill, there's a number that they can call to report it so it can get cleaned up before surface or groundwater gets contaminated. And then also highlighting the importance of proper disposal of household hazardous waste, such as at the house. And then also we have our water quality monitoring programs. And so in addition to all the water quality data that are collected by the public water systems from the source wells, I mentioned wellhead protection monitoring. Here's an example here of a wellhead protection monitoring well being sampled. It's on the side of College Street here, and this is part of our early warning network. So there is a lot of data collection occurring. So the public water system data that goes to the Department of Health, and then we do have this wellhead protection data that I know Lacey's got program, Olympia, Thurston County has their programs, Tumwater has some programs. So there is a lot of data collection going on. So with that said, with all this data collection going on, what do you do when the data show there's a problem? And so I want to give an example that actually complements some of the stuff that Kevin and Art were talking about. Down here, we've got the Capital City Golf Course. Here's College Street and Yelm Highway. This is a development that was built in the 70s. High density of septic systems in an area with poor soils. From what I understand, the types of septic systems that were installed may not be approved under today's standards just because of the not only the high density, but also the soils. And it was an area where nitrate concentrations were elevated, but not super concerning until probably about 15 years ago. Nitrate concentrations started increasing, and then they got to the point where they exceeded the action level that both Art and Kevin mentioned, that 4 milligrams per liter. And that action level is like, you need to start looking at what are the potential sources and how do you control them. Well, given that the city of Lacey had its wells about here, and then we saw the elevation in nitrate concentrations, we were looking at septic systems, but people were also asking, well, what about the golf course? Well, there's another well here in the middle of the golf course, so that one's going to be completely surrounded by golf course turf maintenance. And that one, they weren't seeing any changes in the nitrate concentration. So this area where it's completely surrounded by residences and septic systems, we didn't think we really needed to do a big study to start looking at what are our options for either treating the drinking water source for nitrate, or do we just go for source control? So what happened is the city needed to do a water line replacement project anyway. That area was already supplied by City of Lacey water. So we thought while we were in there, why don't we just go ahead and install sewer lines? And then we thought, well, if we're installing sewer lines, maybe we should connect the residences. And we couldn't require that. And so after a lot of discussions, the city weighed the costs and decided to go ahead and provide incentives for people to hook up. So it was all voluntary. But if people agreed to hook up within a certain period of time, the city agreed to pay for the project. So we extended the sewer lines, we made the connections, and decommissioned the septic systems. And this is a project that's being done in 2 phases. It's just starting, but the first sewer connections are just being made on the eastern area. So it's a 2-year project. But one of the coolest things that really is going to happen is that it will provide a test case for us to be able to track the effectiveness of converting septic systems to sewer and seeing if we can track improvements in groundwater nitrate levels. So we just increased the frequency of some of the monitoring that we're doing in the area. So hopefully we can be able to show those improvements in a couple of years' time. Other potential contaminant pathways that we want to keep an eye on, the stormwater the improvements in the stormwater manual has been really good for protecting surface water quality, but now with all the emphasis being on on-site infiltration, that means all stormwater is going into the ground. And the stormwater manuals have really good management practices for minimizing the amount of contaminants that's going into stormwater. And then also they're improving the stormwater treatment that's happening in order to protect groundwater quality. However, there's also been some interest in using underground injection control wells for stormwater management. And that was something that wasn't really addressed in Ecology's stormwater manual, and it wasn't something we really addressed at the local level. And during that time when we were like, that's something we're not sure what to do about, then we started getting development proposals that wanted to use underground injection control wells. And so this is something that we really had to work with. And fortunately, Ecology's newest stormwater manual does address underground injection control wells. And then it's something that we can also address in our local stormwater manuals. But it was something that we kind of got caught unawares with it because it was something new that was happening. Reclaimed water is another one that we want to potentially watch. Reclaimed water, it's highly treated wastewater, and it's used beneficially for irrigation and also for some recreational amendments, like there's the ponds at Hawks Prairie, and there's the Port Plaza downtown in Olympia. And Yelm has this beautiful park that's all reclaimed water. But reclaimed water is also used for groundwater recharge, and Lacey and Olympia use it for water rights mitigation purposes. That said, even though it's highly treated, wastewater treatment doesn't remove everything. And so it is good to consider putting some controls on its use. And so in Lacey's wellhead protection ordinance, we actually prohibit groundwater recharge using reclaimed water within the 1-year time of travel in our wellhead protection areas. And Thurston County also has an outright prohibition on reclaimed water infiltration, though they may be considering that after LOT completes their groundwater study looking at the fate and transport of reclaimed water once it's infiltrated. And finally, other potential contaminant pathways we want to look at are unattended gas stations and mobile fueling services. And unattended gas stations is something that came to our attention from Department of Ecology when we were talking to them about concerns about gas stations and their potential to contaminate groundwater. And they said, were telling us that now that we have the double hull tanks at gas stations, they were more concerned about unattended gas stations because there's no one on site to deal with a potential spill. So, Lacey, we decided we went ahead and used our wellhead protection ordinance just to prohibit them within all wellhead protection areas, just based on that recommendation. Mobile fueling services is something that is kind of new and we're still grappling with how to regulate. The fueling services have been around for a while, mainly for like large trucks that supply the warehouses, that sort of thing. But it's also becoming more common for folks to have an app and they can call someone to come and fuel their car, which some of us had never even heard of that, but apparently it's a thing, and especially in larger cities like Seattle and Portland. And it came to our attention because of concerns from the fire marshal. They were more concerned about this potential safety hazard, but kind of like with the unattended gas stations, we were concerned about, well, what happens if a spill happens? And so this is something we haven't really addressed it yet, but it's something that we're keeping an eye on. So this is just, things are always coming up and we try to keep one step ahead, but sometimes we just have to be reactive. And finally, I can't not mention climate change because it really will change how we plan for protecting groundwater, particularly our existing wells. And one thing with sea level rise, it definitely affects existing wells within a flood zone. And here, this is just a photo from last February in the Nisqually Valley. All this chocolate milk here is Nisqually River water. And this little island here, right here are Lacey's 2 water supply wells that are just happen to be on dry land, and their power's off, they're sandbagged, they're wrapped in plastic. So the wells were okay, but this is not sustainable. It really isn't. And so with climate change, we need to be looking at how we supply water in flood zones. We also need to consider seawater intrusion for wells located along the shoreline, whereas they're pumping, it potentially can bring salt water into the aquifers. It can pull, and then you can get mixing with fresh water with salt water. And that's something that we really have to keep an eye on. And because the city of Lacey, we have a number of wells located in the Hawks Prairie area, and they're deep wells. They're completed like 550 feet deep. So they're completed below sea level. And so we have seawater intrusion monitoring wells just to ensure that pumping does not cause seawater intrusion. So the main thing, and finally also the change in groundwater recharge patterns, that's something we're going to have to keep an eye on because it could, I would think, it would potentially affect the mobility of contaminants into groundwater. And so really what we must do as far as climate change is that we need to address it in our resiliency planning. We need to plan for climate change. So with that, I just want to quickly summarize. So we can minimize risk from potential sources of contamination through our ordinances, through wellhead protection planning, and through our water quality monitoring programs. And one of the challenges is updating our regulations to address new contaminant sources, trying to keep on top of new potential contaminant sources as we identify them. Can't emphasize enough the importance of source control and public education. If you don't want it in the waste stream, the best thing is to keep it out. So I'm always a strong advocate for source control. And finally, we need to plan for climate change. So with that, I'm done.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. What a wonderful presentation. And thank you for being with us tonight. So now I'd like to invite all three of our panelists to be present with us by video. And our little team is going over the questions that were submitted on Q&A. But in the meantime, I have a couple of questions that were prepared. So I'd like to pose them and ask that responses be as efficient as possible, because we're going to be at our bewitching hour pretty soon. So I guess this first one is probably for Art. It says the previously the county health department worked well with the support and opinions of a citizens advisory committee. Has this been beneficial in the past, and is that something that could be considered for resurrection?
So I'm not exactly sure which committee that one was, but there's been a bunch. And I think, at least my experience that I mentioned earlier, having the opportunity to work with the community members to identify concerns and approaches and solutions has been effective in the past. And I think Julie and Kevin both mentioned things that, when you're talking about projects, in order to really be effective, you need to have the community involved with it. Make sure that, again, coming up with the best ideas, helping ensure that there's an understanding and ownership of the issues that we're trying to face, how to approach them. If you're ever going to have to talk about things like funding and things, looking at the best ways to do that, it's all very important. And so I think there's lots and lots of reasons why it would be great to be able to re-engage a community group that would help us kind of get through these difficult issues that everybody's been describing tonight. There aren't easy solutions, and there's not really easy answers, and we need to work with everybody who can help us come up with the best solutions.
Oh, thank you. It's great that we have a superb citizenry around here to help. Okay, next question. Monitoring and implementing measures to protect the quality of our water is a priority for all of us. What is the present status of funds available to gather this information? And is there improved technology that would help us become more informed? So funding and technology to protect water quality. So I don't know, any of you have
I think Kevin and Julie can talk about technology a lot better than I can, but there is, I think, speaking for the county health department, and probably one of the things, if I had a magic wand, I would figure out how, at least within the county, we could identify the things we need to do and best align the funding sources with them. Because sometimes we tend to be a little bit siloed, and I hate to admit it, but in fact, it's an issue for us. But we do have some limited funding for long-term monitoring of surface waters, and that's been good. Some of the things I described about the health department for being able to focus on pollution sources and correct those, that's not where it could be. And so, again, I think that's something we're looking to try to figure out how to do. As folks have indicated, some of these new concerns that are coming forward, whether they're a big issue or not, we don't know, but some of the chemicals of emerging concern or residual chemicals, things like that, both in ground and surface water, being able to have the resources to look at that and answer those questions, that's tougher. There's a lot of one of the lists of chemicals that Julie showed. Those are the ones we're supposed to monitor. There's a list much longer of things that people have questions about that we're trying to come to grips with, and so those are issues that are coming forward. And
so
Kevin
are there adequate funding sources to do all this?
I think the short answer is no, not ongoing. And I think we're able to get grants and things to do a lot of stuff, but they can be hit and miss, and grants while they're really good, they can also be hard to obtain and hard to retain. And so I think there's a need for more resources, frankly, yes.
Yeah, I remember when I was in the legislature, we took a big look at this, and money for monitoring was kind of way down the list, unfortunately. That's one of the biggest needs. How do you know how well you're doing? As Julie was saying, see how you're doing. You get a baseline, and then you move ahead. So let's see. So here's one on septic systems. Considering the population growth and the growth of the number of septic systems since 1990, the growth projections, what measures might you suggest to help Thurston County protect our water quality in the short, medium, and long term? Now you could do a whole college course on that, but do you have a quick, a few bullet points you could suggest? So the
Is this my
population
question
growth
again?
yeah.
Oh, I was going to pawn this one off on Julie. But no, I think it gets down to being able to do the monitoring work that to evaluate the potential impacts that on-site systems have, whether they're failing, whether they're causing an impact to groundwater resources, whether they might be contributing to surface water resource contamination because of the wrong technology or the pollutants that we're concerned about. So I think that's a big thing, is to be able to do sufficient monitoring and education and outreach so that folks know what to look for and they can correct things before they become big problems. And in some cases, so that policymakers have the information they need to make some of the tough decisions, like the folks at Lacey did about whether or not to extend sewer utilities out. So I think those are some of the big things. And to be able to have, speaking for Thurston County, we don't have the same level of resources and capability countywide. We have some areas like Henderson Inlet where we've been fortunate to get grants and to have really broad reaching programs that have been very effective. There are other areas where we don't have that. And that's been, it's a difficult situation, but that's, I think, what we need to be able to do, as well as to continue to make sure that we're permitting the things the best way we can, taking into account, Kevin mentioned assimilative capacity, figuring out, really how much capacity does the earth have for on-site systems within an area, so that we're considering new land use developments and things, we're making the best decisions we can. We're providing the best information to policymakers and hearings examiners and all that, so they can consider projects.
Yeah, Julie, would you like to add anything?
Sure. The only thing I'd add is that septic to sewer conversion is really, really expensive. And so that Capital City Golf Course example that I gave is a little over, I think it was just under 400 residences that are being converted. And the cost is approximately $8 million. So if you remember that figure that Kevin showed at the beginning that showed all the purple dots, there's a lot of septic systems out there within our urban growth areas. And this is a really controversial topic. I mean, from a groundwater protection standpoint, it makes sense that urban services should be provided in urban areas, but it's going to be really, really challenging to get to the point where we convert all these septic systems to sewer, even when sewer is available. That's where funding is key, and we probably won't be able to fund it all at the local level, at least not for a very long time. It's going to be very challenging. And also to figure out how to prioritize areas for conversions, the water quality monitoring data, I think, is going to be really important to sort of help prioritize those areas. We might have to choose based on protecting specific areas of surface waters or specific groundwater areas that we might need to focus on first. But yeah, it's a tough issue here.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. I see Carol is here. That must mean you have gone through some of the questions. If you could unmute yourself, and could you pose a couple of the questions within our time here?
Great. Yes, I can. I just wanted to mention that we did get some messaging that folks were having some issues regarding not being able to see some of the presentation, and really we can't fix that on this end, but maybe there's a way that you can go back, for those of you that couldn't see the presentation, and check your own video and audio feeds. So sorry if people have missed the visual part of the presentation. So we do have a number of great questions. So let me just say that. And one of the questions had to do with, should we be watering our lawns? And I know that that can be a simple question, but it's a relevant one for many folks. And any of you can answer that.
Well, I'll just point out that stopping lawn watering in the summer has been a big help in a lot of very dry climate areas. And I know that Lacey went to an odd even day watering scheme several years ago. Julie, any thoughts on how that's working?
Yeah, we mainly did that in order to manage our peak water demand. So it was to sort of save on the amount of infrastructure that we would need to build. From a water conservation standard, I don't know if it was really that effective because it needs to go hand in hand with other things like reconsidering landscaping practices, reconsidering frontage improvements that require watering, that sort of thing. And also just in more public education on just how to properly water. A lot of landscape doesn't need as much water as it's being provided. So yeah, more work needs to be done on that.
Yeah, in the Hearst Fix committees, watering of lawns was a huge player in total water consumption. Things that would reduce that, home irrigation would be very helpful.
Great. All right. This one too is open for all three of our panelists. It's becoming popular for gravel mines to reclaim their pits by mining deep into the aquifer and leaving a lake behind. How do authorities with Thurston County view this trend?
Well, I have several gravel mine reviews that I've done in the last few years, and the consumption of water through evapotranspiration, for example, evaporation from the top of the mine pond is one of the things that has to get looked at. It's a tricky question. It has to be evaluated site by site. Mr. Gostetter, I know you have perhaps a particular mine in mind. I'm not sure we've got time in this forum to really give this a full treatment.
No, all we can do is quick summaries here and hope people will explore further. Yeah.
Julie, here's a question for you on how many people in the city of Lacey and the UGA are served by Group A and B water systems. Is it not city water?
There are actually quite a few other water systems located within the city of Lacey and within Lacey UGA. I don't have a total number on that. But there are a lot. And over time, eventually our goal is to take them over, but right now they have every right to continue to self-supply. Yeah, sorry, I don't have a number on that. I'm guessing even within the Lacey service area, there's probably at least 20 to 25 other water systems. There could be more.
And we have far too many questions for all of them to be asked. I just wonder if it would be possible for folks to follow up with you individually if they wanted to do that. And one way for them to get your contact information is for you to rename yourself with your email address. If you'd be willing to do that, if people wanted to follow up with you later on.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. However, in the context of the plan being developed by the league, I'm wondering if taking the questions, synthesizing them, and asking for a written response from us might be helpful for the league's analysis process.
Oh, I think that's a useful suggestion.
Yeah. And I do have, I've kept a copy of all the questions so they can go right back to you. So I can get them to the water committee after our meeting.
I was going to say, if you can send the questions to us, we can, or at least I'll speak for myself. I'd be willing to try to answer them in writing or however we can best do that.
That's great. Should we ask one more question or say our good nights? What do you think, Karen?
Well, we're close to the end. I think we wanted to say a couple of ending things. So I'd just like to say we are recording this, and I believe the recording will soon be put on the League of Women Voters webpage. So maybe if that's the case, then those who couldn't see the slides could maybe see them if they look at the recording. So I hope that would be the case. And then when we get responses back from the compilation of the questions, we could add that to the webpage summary. How does that sound?
I think that's a really good way of working this out. There's always going to be some bugs in how we are trying to move from meeting face to face to all of the various workarounds we have. So I think that's a great idea. Thank you. And I think we can close our meeting. I want to again thank Paula and the Water Study Committee for all of the hard work and this ongoing leadership in bringing the Where's the Water series to the public and to our members. And give a special round of applause to our excellent presenters, Kevin Hansen, Art Starry, Julie Rector. Thank you so much. And thanks also to our tech wizards, Julie Knipe and Ralph Cumberland. And Karen, our abiding gratitude to you always for being just so tireless as a volunteer for the League. I know that you've worked hand in hand throughout this process for the last 2 years, along with the Water Study Committee. You are a nimble and very capable moderator, and we're just so grateful to you. And to all of you who showed up tonight, we appreciate your presence. Those of you from the community, and to our Thurston League members. If you're not a member yet, please do consider joining us. Regardless of our title, we are open to men and to women and to all who are 16 and older. And we've also had a few younger members join us as well as being part of a family. So when you join the League, keep in mind you're actually a member of not just the local league, but the state and the national league as well, where our dues here in Thurston County help to fund the league attorneys who are fighting for voting rights and against voter suppression in other states. Our membership year runs from June 1st to May 31st. Yearly dues are $75, and we have a $25 rate for those of us on limited or fixed incomes. And once you join or renew your membership, please do find a way to become actively involved. All that we do, our programs, the events, including this forum and the getting out the vote activities and all of the candidate forums that have been on our website, it's all done through the committed work of volunteers. Many of you were here tonight. So thank you for that. And you can join us online or feel free to contact anyone that you can reach through our website, and we would love to have you join us. Thank you again, everyone, and we'll see you next time, either for a forum, a meeting, or coffee with the League, which happens Tuesday mornings at 10 a.m. And next month, we have the State League Action Workshops on 2 Saturdays, December 5th and December 12th, starting at 9. For more information, please do go to our website. There's a lot of great information there. That's www.thurstonlwv.com. So please do join us. And thank you again. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.